Hello students, today we will take up the second chapter from your textbook Hornbill. The title of the chapter is We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together. This chapter has been written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. Now let us know something about the author. Gordon Cook is a two-time Canadian Olympic sailor. He is a graduate of the Engineering Physics program at Queen's University. Cook is the only person ever to represent Canada twice in the 49-year class at the Olympic Games. Now about Alan East. Alan East was admitted to the role of solicitors in 2003 and has gained extensive experience as a manager and legal trainer. Alan is also a co-founder of a multi-academy trust called Central Academies Trust, which has as its aim improving standards in secondary education. Now, before reading the chapter, let me give you a quick introduction of the chapter. The story, We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together, is about a 37-year-old businessman who is the narrator of the story. Now he has a wife named Mary and he has two children named Jonathan, who is aged 6, and Suzanne, who is of 7 years. Now he and his wife both dream of a voyage around the world on their ship called Wave Walker. So the name of their ship is Wave Walker. Now this ship is a 23-meter long ship and it is 30-ton wooden hulled, just like that of the famous Captain James Cook. Now the whole family started sailing from Plymouth, England on July 1976, and the initial phase of their journey, which was a 3-year-long journey. It started from Africa. It was from Africa to Cape Town, and it was a very pleasant one, the first phase of their journey. But while heading towards east along with two newly hired crewmen, they faced a lot of difficulties. There were strong waves which hit them, and because of the harsh weather conditions which they faced, their survival became a question. So the story tells us about how they fought each day and how they fought for their survival. So let us know more about their journey and their hardships which they faced during their voyage. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan 6, daughter Suzanne 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamt of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer, and for the past 16 years we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. So here the narrator tells us, the chapter begins like this, that the narrator, a 37-year-old businessman, along with his wife Mary and two children, Jonathan aged 6 and Suzanne aged 7, he went on a voyage on their ship on July 1976. Now they started from Plymouth, England, and they wanted to complete the sea trip, this sea voyage around the world, just like the one that had been completed 200 years ago by the famous Captain James Cook. Now the narrator and his wife, he tells that the narrator and his wife spent 16 years improving their seafaring skills. So seafaring skills are the skills which are needful or which are required to travel by sea. So they had been polishing their skills in order to travel in the British waters. Our boat Wave Walker, a 23-meter, 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty, had been professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. So here the narrator tells us about his boat named Wave Walker, which was a 23-meter, 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty, and he says that it was professionally built, and they took several months to test it in the roughest of weathers in order to be sure that this was safe. The boat was safe for them for their future voyage. Further, the first leg of our planned 3-year, 105,000 kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. There, before heading east, we took on 2 crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Sigwer, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. Okay, so in the initial phase of the 3-year-long journey of 105,000 kilometers, this journey, the initial phase, the first leg, he says, so the first leg of this 3-year-long journey was very pleasant. It passed pleasantly. Now they sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. Okay, so the narrator also hired 2 crewmen before heading towards the east to tackle the roughest sea. That was the Southern Indian Ocean. Now their names were Larry Vigil, an American, and Herb Sigwer, who was a Swiss. Okay, let us read further. Our second day out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. Gales are very strong wind. Okay, so for the next few weeks, they blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming. Up to 15 meters, as high as our main mast. Okay, so on the second day in Cape Town, they encountered a strong wind which continued for several weeks, and the narrator says that strong wind was not a problem for him. But what was the problem? The problem was its height. See, 15 meters high waves were there. They were facing 15 meters high waves, and which were the height of the mast. Now the mast, what is a mast? A mast is a tall upright structure on a boat or a ship. Okay, so the height of the waves was around 15 meters, which was almost equal to that of the mast, and this was the point why the narrator was worried. Okay, because they were facing very, very high waves. Further, December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with a Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon. And it did change for the worse. So, now here what has happened. On December 25, they had travelled 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Now they celebrated Christmas together despite the bad weather and the poor condition in which they were living. So the weather remained the same till New Year's Day, but they hoped the weather would change. Okay, so they were hoping that the weather might change, and the narrator says that yes, the weather did change. And how did it change? The weather conditions worsened. Okay, further, At dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless, enormous sea rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. Then we double lashed everything, went through our life raft drill, attached lifelines, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. So, on the early morning of January 2, the waves were very huge. The narrator tells that they were sailing with a small storm jib. Storm jib, it's a triangular staysail which is set forward the mast in a ship. So they were traveling at a speed of 8 knots. Knots, again, it's a unit of speed. So when the ship was sailing over the huge waves, from the top of each wave, they could see the huge sea in front of them, which was approaching towards them. Okay. The narrator tells us further that the noise of the waves and the strong winds was very painful for their ears. Now, in order to slow down their ship, what they did, they dropped the storm jib and hit a heavy mooring rope. Moorings are the ropes and chains and anchors, which the people in the boat use in order to slow down their boat. Okay, so they dropped the storm jib to slow down the ship and hit a heavy mooring rope across the back part of the ship in a loop. Now then what they did, they tied everything with double force. Now they were trying to safeguard themselves. Also what they did, they put on their oilskins. Now oilskins are a heavy cotton cloth which is waterproof with oil. Again, it is used to save lives. And also they wore life jackets. Then they attached lifelines and went through the life raft drills. Now life raft, you might be aware that it is a small boat. It is a stiff boat which is carried for emergency evacuation. So they went towards the life raft drills and waited. Further, the first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a growing roar, and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. So, around 6 p.m. then the narrator says that an unpleasant silence rolled over. There was ominous silence. Ominous silence here means that there was complete silence all around them. Okay, so an unpleasant silence rolled over around them, and this silence was an indication of a disaster which was about to approach them. Okay, now the wind, he says that the wind suddenly dropped. There was no wind and the sky was darker. It had heavy clouds. There were heavy clouds on the sky, and this huge cloud was coming towards the stern of the ship. But now here the narrator says that then came a growing roar and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. So he felt that this was a cloud, but when this cloud, which appeared to be a cloud, when this thing approached towards the stern, when it came towards the stern of the ship, later the narrator realized that it was not a cloud, rather it was a huge wave which had approached towards the stern. Now he says about the wave that the wave was perfectly vertical and it was twice the height of the previous waves they saw, with the top of the wave looking very unpleasant due to its height. So it was twice the height of the wave which they had been experiencing before. This wave was totally vertical and twice the height of the previous waves faced by them. Okay, further. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. So here the thunder increased and the wave moved up towards the stern. Okay, the waves were increasing their height. Now the narrator and the people in the boat thought that it would not do any huge damage to the ship. But then suddenly there was this huge explosion which completely vibrated the deck, okay, the platform of the boat. It is the point when they were very much afraid. Now the narrator says that a strong moving stream of green and white water broke over the ship. So the ship was also then full of water. And the narrator, what happened, the force of that wave of the water was so strong that the narrator's head smashed in the wheel of the ship. And he remembers that he flew overboard and sank below the waves. So he was all drowned because of the waves which had hit their boat finally. Now he also accepted that when he drowned there in the below the waves, he accepted that his death was approaching and he started losing consciousness. Now he says that as I was losing consciousness, so as he started losing his consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. So he felt quite peaceful, that death seemed to him very much peaceful. Further, unexpectedly my head popped out of the water. A few meters away, Wave Walker was near capsizing, her masts almost horizontal. Then a wave hurled her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guardrails and sailed through the air into Wave Walker's main boom. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow, I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. Water everywhere. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. "We are sinking," she screamed. "The decks are smashed. We are full of water." "Take the wheel," I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. So the narrator had accepted his approaching death, but suddenly his head popped out of the water and he saw the ship, his Wave Walker, that it capsized. It capsized means the ship was about to overturn in the water and its mast was almost horizontal, he says. But then suddenly a wave turned her upright and it was back to normal again. Then he says that his lifeline jerked taut. See, whenever a disaster strikes at sea, the passengers are told to wear the lifeline jackets. Okay, so the narrator was also wearing one of the life jackets, as we read earlier also. So, by saying that his lifeline jerked taut, the narrator means that his life jacket grew tight and it became very difficult for him to breathe. Okay, so then he grabbed the guardrails and he sailed to the ship's main pole. He says that the sea waves tossed him around the deck like an old toned up doll. He says this like a rag doll. So he means that he was thrown up or tossed up by the waves, the strong waves, like an old toned up doll. So the narrator was not actually able to control his balance because of the strong waves which were hitting the entire boat, the entire ship, Wave Walker. Now here we also get to know about the condition of the narrator, that the narrator was injured as his left ribs had cracked and his mouth was filled with blood. Okay, and also he had a broken tooth. From here we come to know this. So with great difficulty he finally found the wheel. He lined the stern for the next wave and waited. Now further he says that there was water everywhere. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. So he could make out that there was water everywhere in their boat, and there was also water below, in the below section of the boat. But then he could not dare to leave the wheel alone. He could not abandon the leave because he still had to control the direction of the boat where it was heading towards. Okay, so he could not leave or abandon the wheel alone. And suddenly what happened? Suddenly the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. So suddenly the front door opened and his wife Mary came screaming that they were sinking. She said, "The decks are smashed, we are full of water." So the narrator finally then handed her the wheel and climbed towards the door. So then he went to investigate what was going on, what was the condition of the boat. Further, Larry and Herb were pumping like madmen. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles. The whole starboard side bulged inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins, and toys sloshed about in deep water. Okay. Further, I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes," they answered from an upper bunk. "But my head hurts a bit," said Sue, pointing to a big bump over her eyes. I had no time to worry about bumped heads. After finding a hammer, screws, and canvas, I struggled back on deck. With the starboard side bashed open, we were taking water with each wave that broke over us. If I couldn't make some repairs, we would surely sink. Now the condition of the boat has worsened, and the narrator says that the crewmen Larry and Herb were pumping the water very fast, okay, like madmen. So they were pumping the water outside the boat with the use of the pumps, of course. They were pumping the water outside the boat. Now the timbers of the ship, he says that the timbers of the ship were broken and they were all hanging badly. Okay, they were in bad shape. So the starboard of the ship had also sunk. The clothes, crockery, charts, tins, toys, they were all roaming around in the deep water. They were all floating because again there was water everywhere, and the narrator had to swim, half swim and crawl to the in order to reach the children's cabin. Now finally when he got into the children's cabin, he asked the children whether they were all right or not, to which Sue replied that yes, they were okay, but there was a big bump on her head. Now the narrator says that he didn't pay much attention to this bump on the head of his daughter Sue, as what was his major concern? His major concern was to save them. Okay. Now the narrator then finally found some screws, hammer and canvas. So he went back to the deck. Now the broken starboard side was letting so much water in that if the narrator could not fix the problem, then he was sure that they would all sink in the sea. So the amount of damage that was made by the waves to the ship was so much that if the narrator won't be able to fix it, they would then surely sink in the sea. Okay, further. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up, with the debris floating around the cabins and the electric pump short-circuited. So there are more problems that these people are facing. The water level rose threateningly. Back on deck, I found that our 2 spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the forestay, sail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main anchor. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to an outpipe and was thankful to find that it worked. So what has happened over here? The narrator was somehow able to control the situation. The narrator stretched the canvas cloth and secured the waterproof hatch which covered the gaping holes. Okay. So some water still streamed below and some was now deflected over the side. So the situation was way much better as the water which was in the ship had deflected to some other direction, or some water had also moved out of the boat. So the condition was way much better than before. Now to worsen the situation, what happened? The hand pump was blocked as there was all debris, all rubbish which was floating around the cabins, and the debris had gone into these hand pumps, therefore they had blocked. Okay. Now he also says that the electric pump got short circuited, so neither was the hand pump working nor were the electric pumps functioning now. Now as the water level rose, the narrator found 2 hand pumps. Okay, and so the 2 spare hand pumps that they had, they were also floating overboard along with the forestay sail. So there was the sail also which was floating on the deck. Then the storm jib, it was also there floating in the water. The dinghies and the main anchor. Dinghies are the small boats, okay, which are again used as an emergency. So as the water level rose, the narrator found 2 hand pumps that had been removed along with the rope, jib and small boat, and also the main anchor. So he found another electric pump. He remembered that okay, they had one extra electric pump which was under the chart room. Now he says, I connected it to an outpipe and was thankful to find that it worked. So when he connected that pump to an outpipe, it started working. So again through this electric pump, they could throw the water outside the boat. Okay, they could pump the water outside the boat. Further, the night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, stirring, and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our mayday calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. Sue's head had swollen alarmingly. She had 2 enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all. So this is a very important paragraph. So the narrator here says that the whole night was about the endless routine, the frequent routine of pumping out the water from the boat. They kept on steering the wheel and working on the radio. Now he says that there was no reply to their mayday calls. Mayday calls are words used to signal ships which are stuck in disastrous situation, and these mayday calls are made through radio. So he says that there was no reply to their signals which were sent over the radio because they were in the remotest part of the world. Now the narrator tells about Sue's condition, the daughter's condition. He says that Sue's head was now more swollen and she had 2 black eyes with a deep cut in her arm. So she was badly injured, the daughter. Now when the father asks her that why she didn't tell him about her injuries earlier, so this daughter gave a very sweet answer. She said that she didn't want to worry him as he was trying to save all of them. Now here we are able to understand that how courageous this daughter was. Okay, she was so understanding. So when she was asked about her injuries, she said that it was because the father was trying so hard to save them from the disaster, from drowning, from dying, that she didn't pay attention to her own wounds, and she felt that the father's efforts were more important over here than telling about her own injuries in front of the father. So it shows that she was very courageous. She had this spirit of endurance. Though being a child, she was able to maintain her calm and she was also a very conscious character. Okay, so we'll cover till here only in this session. I want you all to again reread the chapter, the paragraphs that we have covered, the portion that we have covered in this session. Mark the difficult words and jot down your doubts, whatever you have, for your next session. Thank you, everyone.